So while the next set of panelists is coming up and joining us, I will just check in on everybody's early workforce bingo card and see if anyone had FBI wearing a wire on their card. So you can go ahead and check that one off for you. And, you know, while we're waiting for everyone to come up, you can think about how you're going to pitch to your book club, how everyone should read the Oppenheimer book. I highly encourage that. We can follow the agenda. So Colin, JJ, Joe, and Allison. We'll split. Well, you guys are already here. We'll just go back and forth. That's fine. We can go back and forth. It's fine. You're on this side. I don't want anyone to have a safety moment. You know? It's fine. It's fine. Okay, I think we've got everyone up here at the table. Everyone can refresh their drinks. All right, so as a reminder, just to get everyone refreshed, we wanted to bring together this panel to kind of give you some of their personal experiences, to walk through some supplementary activities that they took on their career path. And I think one of the points that Candace made is really resonated with me about the importance of not thinking as your career is a linear thing, and to stop and, you know, see if people ask you to do something, is there a reason to say no to that? And instead, maybe training yourself to think, yes, I'm going to say yes, I'm going to raise my hand, I'm going to volunteer, and go from there. All right, so I think what we'll do is we have everybody in order here on the agenda, so I won't disrupt everyone's expectations by going out of order. And we'll start with Colin Jones, who's had a number of jobs himself, and we worked together at one point in EM headquarters in the communications office. So I think we both had some semblance of Candace's job at some point in our careers. And you're going to take a little time to talk to us about the value of a Congressional fellowship.
Yeah, good afternoon, everybody. It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you for your interest in career opportunities. I guess being asked to be on this panel, that must mean I'm kind of old now, but to be able to share my experiences. I've been in this industry for 28 years. I currently work for Jacobs, Deputy General Manager of our North American Nuclear Group, which predominantly we do work for Department of Energy, EM cleanup, NNSA, NE, Office of Science, et cetera, et cetera. So, yeah, I'm one of the non-technical people on the panel. So, I, had a bit of an interesting career. Started off, I grew up in the UK, and I kind of fell into the nuclear industry back in 1994. Back in the UK, the degree programs are typically a 3-year degree program. I opted for a degree program that was a 4-year degree program with taking a year out in the industry. And fortunately enough, I got a job in the nuclear industry for a year, which worked out really well for me. It enabled me, once I'd finished that 1-year kind of internship, they asked me to come back. And and that has been my life in nuclear ever since. Had the opportunity to come to the US in 1996 with that company, British Nuclear Fuels, working again for DOE as a contractor. And then kind of had some opportunities to move around, and much in the way that Candace has just articulated is looking for those opportunities and kind of grabbing them with both hands. I took a job with the Battelle Energy Alliance, which runs the Idaho National Lab. I was based in Washington, D.C. I've been here the whole time since I moved over to the U.S. in '96. And as part of that job, I actually got loaned to 2 senators from Idaho, Larry Craig and Mike Crapo. So I got the opportunity to work on the Hill for 3 years on their energy portfolios. So Senator Larry Craig specifically, he was on energy and water appropriations, which has the DOE account. He was on the Energy Committee, which authorizing legislation for everything you can think of from an energy perspective, and on the Environment Public Works Committee. So he had a very energy-focused mindset. With the Idaho National Lab is one of the biggest employers in the state of Idaho. So he took great interest in the lab and the growth of the lab and in the growth of nuclear energy. And so I was able to go up there and work for him for 2 years, basically staffing him, helping write legislation, helping put in the appropriations language together on budgets and things to enable the growth across the whole entire energy sector. For most of you here, you're all pretty set in your careers, but if you ever get an opportunity to go work on Capitol Hill, I would really encourage you to do it. It's a fascinating experience. Those of you with children, encourage them to go do an internship for your local member of Congress. It is an absolutely fascinating place of which I've worked on commercial industry, I've worked in the federal government, I've worked on the Hill, and working on the Hill is nothing quite like it. And being able to participate in the process of making laws, of finalizing appropriations budgets each year for some of these major programs was so insightful. Even today, when did I left? I guess I went from the Hill, then I went to DOE in 2010. I still remember, the things that I learned in those 3 years in working for 2 senators was unbelievable. Even just something as simple as writing talking points, working for Senator Craig, no bullet. You couldn't have a set of bullets. Each individual bullet couldn't be more than 2 lines. And so when you're talking about a complex nuclear topic or anything, you're having the right bullet points, and each bullet can only be 2 lines. That's a skill that you have to learn. And again, it's something that I feel like still today that I benefited from that. So another key factor that was really good in that opportunity, though, was making connections. The beauty about being working on Capitol Hill is there's a lot of people that care about each individual issues. So we would always have people from industry, constituents from the state in the office wanting to talk about whatever specific issue. And it really enabled me to expand my network. And networks is important. Again, you heard Candace talking about that, and growing your networks is important. And again, growing that network at that time is what enabled me then to go and get some of my follow-on jobs. That's why I got hired into my next job at the Department of Energy. Is at the time in 2010, they had the American Reinvestment and Recovery Act, and the EM program got an extra $6 billion. And what came with that was some insane reporting requirements back to Congress. And so Inez Trier, the Assistant Secretary at the time, hired me because she had to come up and brief me and the senator once a quarter on the cleanup activities in the state of Idaho. And again, so just making that connection, growing that network was extremely helpful for me and my career. So do we have a time limit? I mean, I could just go on and on. It's just...
Well, I'll come back to you, Colin. How about that?
All right. Well, thank you very much for the opportunity.
No, I appreciate that. Next on our list is JJ Chavez, who I think can echo some of Candace's remarks about serving in public office. Do you have an FBI story you can share for us? But also JJ serves on our EM advisory board and is, are you still on the board for Energy Communities Alliance? He's a busy guy. Also works full-time at our waste isolation pilot plant. So looking forward to hearing your remarks. Your official topic is running for local public office, but feel free to be more expansive.
Yeah, so my previous job, when I first started, I was a deputy sheriff. I was a cop for, 2-3 years on the SWAT team, did all that fun stuff, and then got a little hectic there at times. And then I went into the nuclear industry. I went and worked at Urenco as a centrifuge technologist at Urenco and Eunice, and then from there, I integrated over to the WIP site. So that was fun, and then along the way, I went and ran for office. That's how I got into office. I was actually fairly young. I was in my early 30s. They said, "Why do you want to run?" I said, "Why not?" You know, if I don't try, I'll never know. So if you don't try, you'll never know what you're capable of doing and succeeding. So I ran, and I was able to beat one of my incumbents. And I ran, and it's probably been one of the best decisions I made because it's been fun. It's been eventful, and the experience that I gained from running and running a city to now running my second term and winning, and I'm the mayor pro tem now for the city of Carlsbad in Carlsbad, New Mexico. I was elected, and then I got elected as the mayor pro tem. As to be in second command has been so much eventful. I now serve on the finance committee. I run the finance committee, and then I oversee the directors board as well. So for these young individuals out here, just go out there and do it. Like, it's your imagination. What I mean by it's your imagination, you're the only one that sees it, and you're the only one that can do it. So nobody else can stop you. So if you can dream it, you can do it. Don't tell nobody else, because they're gonna think you're not capable of doing it. But if you go out and do it, you can get it done. So that's one of I've always gone by that. So I always liked that. And then running for city council has always been fun. It's priceless, because really, we don't get paid nothing. I think I get paid like $1 an hour, if that, if that, because it's not about what I make, it's about helping the lady next door or helping the individual that might not think it's a big deal to you, but it's a huge, big deal to them. From the RV being parked in front of their house to the tree coming onto their property. And you have the proper resources to tell the individuals, hey, you can't do that, to get the RV parked in the move, get the RV moved in the front road. It's like, able to get those resources and individuals over there, because it's taking them a month to try to find the proper resources to get that done, and they're frustrated and they don't know what else to do, and they're getting ready to beat up their neighbor. I'm like, you can't do that, sorry, let me take care of it. I'll handle it tomorrow, I promise. And they call back and say, thank you so much. This is what I've been wanting to get done. It's that when you get that phone call back saying thank you, that's what the job's about. It's not about anything else. It's about helping the person next door and getting that phone call and saying thank you. So that's what I enjoy about being a city councilor, and the reason I ran.
Can you talk a little bit about what you do for us at WIP?
Yeah, I am a safety operations manager for the WIP site. So I oversee the safety operations for all the crews at the WIP site for surface and underground. So I deal with industrial hygiene and safety, and then I deal with all the USW safety reps as well. I came as a USW safety rep. I started at WIP as a United Steelworkers safety rep. So I did that for 4 years, and then I enjoyed it. And then I asked what else I needed to do to continue my education as a USW safety rep. So I took more classes in industrial hygiene, safety, and then eventually I ended up being a supervisor. As a supervisor, I was a supervisor for a crew on the safety side. Then eventually I moved up to superintendent of the safety, and then now I'm the safety operations manager. So it's just, I continued my education, and then it was always about, I honestly still don't know. I don't know everything, but it's about having a mentor and able to talk to my supervisors and my managers and able to talk and see what other classes I need, what degree do I need to get, or what CPA, certificates I might need, certified professional safety, I might need that class, or, continue my education. If they see that you want the drive, they're willing to give you the chance and invest in your education for you. So it's been fun. I've enjoyed it.
Thanks, JJ. Next on the agenda, we've got Joe Aylor, who comes to us from our UCOR contract in the Oak Ridge site. And he's going to talk to us about what doing a rotation in business development means. And looking on the wrong side of the table. We're just looking at you when JJ was talking. Sorry about that. I was. Yeah,
Must be the
the
hair.
other Oak Ridge contingent today. I think in my head I was also crafting some sort of joke about being on a golf course is what business development's all about. So maybe Joe can address that for us when he says his
Or maybe
insights as well.
not, maybe not. No. Thanks, Kristen. She mentioned my name is Joe Aylor. I'm currently a Director of Critical Projects for United Cleanup Oak Ridge. We have the prime contract for the Department of Energy's Oak Ridge Office of Environmental Management at the Oak Ridge Reservation. As it kind of relates to this topic, though, my stint in BD occurred with our parent company, Amentum, so I'm going to kind of walk through that. Before I do, you commented on the bingo card about the FBI. Let me just say I did not have dolphins, prostitution, or Heidi Fleiss on mine, so I'm going to have to get a little more creative with my bingo cards moving forward there. Let me take you back just a little bit and try to tie this together, because it's certainly a subject that I'm very passionate about. Business development comes up a lot, and people even ask me, a lot of people that I mentor, a lot of the next generation come up and ask me about it quite often, and I love to kind of tell my story as it relates to that. So I was a civil engineer by degree from the University of Tennessee. But growing up and early in my career, I always felt like I wanted a little taste of the business side of things. And I'd say as a general observation, when I was looking at a lot of senior and executive level managers that were in my corporation at the time, I would always see senior level managers or executives that could do one of two things. Number one, they could execute projects successfully, and so that was why they had risen throughout their career, and whether that's a project manager, or an engineering manager, or a business manager, or safety manager, that's where that aspect came from. And then I would also see a lot of senior level managers that got to partner status or executive level status that could go off and win the work, so the business development aspect of it. But what was always really, really interesting to me, those that had both were always at the very tip top of the organization, and that always intrigued me. And when you really think about it, there's a lot of logic to that, right? Our business, and certainly on the contractor side of things, we aren't just given work most of the time. We have to go off and earn it. And translating that when you're doing stuff around your house and you go solicit a contractor, right? That contractor's got to know how to get business and keep their own business going. And it's no different, it's just on a lot different, larger scale related to some of these government contracts. And so that was always very intriguing to me, and I think it was always something that I wanted to go get into. And so somewhere several years into my career, as I mentioned, I spent a lot of time on projects, but I went back to school and I got my MBA. And as I was getting my MBA, one of the organizational thesis projects that I was doing, I had to work with the company that I was with at the time, their business development group. And it was something that I really enjoyed for this 3 to 4, 6 months that I was doing it there. And after my MBA wrapped up, I told my mentor at the time I would really like an opportunity in business development. And it didn't take long after that where I was pulled off the project and put into a business development role. And so that's how kind of all of it connects, at least from my career experience. But now it's the why. Why is business development a very good role that can not only make you a better employee, but lead to career progression and things of that nature? I could probably go on and talk about several factors all day long, but I'm going to kind of boil it down to 4 or 5. Number one is about ownership and understanding the scope of the work. Number 2, once you know the scope of the work and have an understanding for the contract or the project you're working, you're essentially starting a company from the ground up. Number 3, it gives you a lot of ability to develop your business acumen. And I'll talk in more detail about that in a second. Number 4, I think it helps give you a broader and deeper understanding of the agency that you're working for or supporting, their overall mission at I'll say, a very macro level. So all the things, how the pieces connect, not just the project you're on, but maybe complex-wide. And then number 5 is overall with the networking aspect. And so I'm going to dive into those briefly here. So number 1, I talked about the ownership and the understanding of the contract and the scope of work. So generally, if you're in business development as a director or a capture manager and you're pursuing an opportunity with whatever government agency that it may be, you are tasked with knowing absolutely everything about that procurement. That means the scope of work, that means the contract type, that means the hot buttons that the client may have, that means the milestones, deliverables, and overall their key mission. I would argue you are tasked with knowing that better than anyone, maybe up to and including even the PM that is going to ultimately run that job. There's so much that goes with it, and you have to be the owner that is tasked with driving the bus with your team. That segues into my second item, and that's essentially standing the organization up to go not only bid on, but to execute that work. So taking everything that I just talked about in my first item, understanding the scope, the contract requirements, the deliverables, and so on, and formulating a team around that so that you can go beat other competitors who are vying for that same contract. And that means assembling your key personnel. That means putting the best suppliers, subcontractors, other prime contractors together to ensure that you can cover the entire scope of work. And there's a number of other things. You start diving into items such as business systems, HR, payroll, things that are often looked. You can't skip those, you have to put them all together, and those are all the puzzle pieces that ultimately make a company whole. Number 3, the business acumen, and this may be one of the things that I think that I've taken away from it the most. Understanding that when you put these teams together, you have to work with operating agreements and teaming agreements and being able to form a strategy around how that company earns money, earns fee, the requirements that the company is ultimately governed by, how your overhead, your G&A, and other things like that work, so that that company is profitable, but also doing things that are in the best interest for the client as well. Number 4, the deeper understanding of the agency mission. When I started my career and had various roles, I would say I didn't know much outside the world I was living in. However, with a stint in business development, coming to conferences such as this, Waste Management, Rad Waste, ATIBA conferences, a number of things like that, just off the top of my head, you learn more and more about the business. You hear individuals like Candace talk, like Kristen talk, a lot of our field managers such as Erik and Jay and whatnot, and you get a really good sense of what the overarching mission is and how all those puzzles and the pieces are all connected. And having that higher level view really helps you on more of the micro level as well, and so that's something to take away from it. And then finally, again, kind of building off my thoughts about the workshops and the conferences, networking. Networking could be the most important of any of those that I just mentioned. Networking with people across the entire industry at different sites. You're networking, you're getting to know suppliers, subcontractors, other prime contractors. And the reason those things are important is to help solve the problems. Candace talked a lot about the problems, or let me rephrase it into more of the challenges and opportunities that we have in this industry. Knowing customers or knowing subcontractors or suppliers that you can go to based on your experience and the relationship that you've been building with them is awesome and amazing, because when those challenges come up, you can go to them and they can help you find those solutions. So those are some of the whys of this. So just kind of the key takeaways wrap up here from my standpoint. A strong business development performer in many ways for me can be a springboard for a career. In fact, many people in this audience that I've seen here have had a stint in business development and are now in executive level roles across the DOE-EM complex, all the way up to president level type roles that they have. A very good rotational assignment in BD can drive career progression. But then again, most importantly, I think it can help facilitate a broader and a deeper understanding of your next roles as you grow throughout your career. So thank you, Kristen.
Thank you, Joe. Allison is next, and she's sitting at this table, and I'm making eye contact, and I'm looking at the right place this time.
Yes, hi, I'm Allison. I'm Allison Finelli. I was asked to talk about being a chief of staff. This is my first time attending the early career professional event, but I'm glad it's become part of the cleanup workshop, because I think it's a great opportunity for you to hear more about the cleanup world, and I hope you learn some new things from the panelists here today. I'd also like to start with the fact that there are 3 former chief of staffs up here with me today, Kristen, Erik, and Colin. I've had the pleasure of working with all of them and for Kristen and Erik in different capacities, so I'm sure they have lots of perspectives on the chief of staff role as well. And there's a few people in the audience who have come and gone, so I recognize that I'm not the only chief of staff out there. But I think Kristen, Erik, and Colin are great examples of the fact that you can do a chief of staff role and then move into something else in your next stage of your career. And I feel lucky that I've been able to learn from all 3 of them. When we had the planning call, Marty asked us to cover what we thought about the jobs before we went into them and kind of what we think about our roles now. So I tried to stick to that a little bit, but for me, what I thought before starting this job is a little hard to remember, because I've been doing various staffing for leadership, as I'll call them, roles for a long time. I started my career working for ECA, the organizer of this conference. It's hard for me to believe this is the 10th one, because it started the year I left ECA. I never actually planned one, so it's been 10 years since I left ECA. And then I moved over to Department of Energy in the Intergovernmental and Communications offices. You'll also hear a lot of similarities between things Candace has said, and I did not copy her speech, and I'm no way comparing myself to Candace, but we've had a lot of similar opportunities. So I was working in the communications office. A few years into that, there was an opportunity for a detail that came up to be an executive officer for the head of field operations. I was told that the role was like a chief of staff and that it was a great opportunity. So, like Candace said, when these opportunities are presented to you, a good thing to do is to often look into them and think about taking them. The only problem was I had no idea really what a chief of staff did, or an executive officer, any staffing job really. All I knew was that it was scary when you got an email from the chief of staff. Usually meant they wanted something from you and they wanted it very quickly. In the 8 years since I took that position, I've had many different staffing for leadership roles. I've supported 6 different principals in front office teams and headquarters in the field, and now in LM. I know our titles are crazy, but I think my title list kind of demonstrates the crazy path that your career can take. So I was the executive officer for field operations in EM, then I was the executive officer for the assistant secretary of EM, then I went out to Hanford and was the chief of staff for Office of River Protection, then I came back and was the deputy chief of staff for EM, and finally now I'm the chief of staff for legacy management. Some of those roles were an acting basis, some started off as details and became permanent, and now I've been permanently in LM for 2 years. My point in telling you all that, and I know it was a lot like I said, is the road to being a chief of staff can be convoluted. For me, it's been a winding path. Leaders come and go, you come and go, and your career path may not seem like it's having a straight progression. So before starting all the staffing work that I've done, I didn't know what to expect. Obviously, as I've moved into each different role, I've learned more and more about these types of jobs. But for me, with every change of role or change of leader, my day-to-day activities have also changed. So now, what do I think about now in making the case for serving as the chief of staff? I think everyone who serves as a chief of staff will do the job a little differently. Different organizations and leaders have different needs. In DOE, my experience has been that your job will be impacted by things like who is your leader, what is their management style, how big is your organization, how visible is your office's mission, what are the priorities of your leadership team. So everyone will have a different approach, but what are the main goals and activities of being a chief of staff? I'd say your main goal is to support your organization's most senior leader, to help them manage the day-to-day operations of the organization, help them be prepared, provide them with strategic advice, communicate on their behalf, and implement their direction. You also are a resource to the staff of your organization. You can help clarify executive intent, share information on behalf of your boss, and coordinate among your management team. With each iteration of staff work that I've done, I've tried to adapt my approach to best fit the leader and the organization I'm supporting. Hopefully, if you're doing a good job, you're anticipating problems before they become problems, you're working to ensure clear lines of communication across all your colleagues, and surprises for the boss are never a good thing, so try to avoid those. By working closely with the senior leadership team, you have a unique perspective that many others in the organization might not have, and it's often up to you to connect the dots or manage issues so your boss can focus on their main goal of steering the policy of the organization. And oftentimes you're connecting dots that other people just might not even be aware of. I will say, I don't think the chief of staff is a boring job ever. It's cliche, but every day will be a little different, and every day you're working with a wide range of people, other managers and staff in your organization, other offices within DOE, external stakeholders, contractors, congressional staff, other federal agency staff. You really talk to a lot of different people. A lot of your time is spent in meetings, on the phone, sending emails, checking in on projects, following up on assignments, reviewing materials or correspondence before it goes to the boss. Sometimes you'll deal with an emerging crisis, and often that's just first understanding what the crisis is from folks out in the field. Then you might have to work with the communications team to figure out how to address the issue with stakeholders or other senior leaders. You might have to write a summary paper for the Secretary of Energy. Sometimes these crises will blow over quickly, and other times there'll be an ongoing issue that you'll be dealing with in many ways for years. Some days you're focused on a trip or a conference. You'll have to decide things like, is this the best use of my leadership's time and energy? How can we use these types of engagements to further our specific projects or initiatives? Maybe you'll do a final review of the talking points or the presentation. Sometimes you'll write the talking points yourself the night before the speech. Sometimes you'll go on these trips with your boss to help them. Sometimes you have to go on the trip in your boss's place. Other times you're focused on the strategic direction of the organization. You could be drafting the organization's annual goals and working with the budget team to make sure the budget supports those goals. You could be evaluating the need for staffing changes or reorganization of your office. Sometimes you're doing boring administrative work. You may have to review travel expenses or approve time cards or respond to a data call. These are just a few examples of I've done all of those things over the years. But essentially, I found that a successful chief of staff will do what the boss needs, and this requires close alignment with your senior leader. This does not mean that you go to your boss and ask them what they need you to do. This means being organized, observing the needs of your organization, managing an ever-evolving priority list, and executing assignments and tasks as needed. It also means eventually learning how to anticipate and prevent problems, knowing what your boss does or doesn't need, and helping others in the organization execute accordingly. The job can certainly be time-consuming and frustrating. There are late nights and weekend emails, but I find my current role to be very rewarding. My efforts are appreciated, and I hope they contribute to make my organization better. Every day you are presented with new challenges, and I found that the beauty of being a chief of staff is hopefully you've established a level of trust with your leadership where they allow you to work with a wide range of team members and come up with a plan to handle those challenges you face. I've also found that once you have that trust established, you have a really large amount of autonomy in the way you do your work and when you're working on it and how you're approaching it. I will close with this. There's no guarantee you'll get a chief of staff spot. Each office in DOE only has one. But if it's something you're interested in, I hope that you see from my background that you can get many chief of staff-like experiences that can prepare you for the role, and I'd argue give you valuable skills for many other jobs you may want to pursue in the future. Thanks.
Thank you, Allison. And I was the one who hired her into the federal government, so I'm going to take credit for that 10 years later. Also, you know, I think if you all are having questions for the panelists, and we've already heard a lot of extensive views, some of the other uniqueness of Allison's background, she's a second generation DOE civil servant. So she can talk to you about other offices besides environmental management and legacy management. And then, you know, having come from Energy Communities Alliance, so coming from a nonprofit and coming to the federal sector, I think gave you a lot of different perspectives coming into DOE. Don't want to speak on your behalf. But speaking of other kind of offices within the larger DOE family, we're going to hear next from Erik Olds, and his focus is talking between headquarters and field assignment, but he also has worked in other offices, you know, and know you are former military as well, so you've had a lot of experiences in lots of different places, and we're looking forward to hearing from you. Maybe dive in a little bit on headquarters and field rotations.
Absolutely, thank you. Hey, thank you, everyone. You know, if early career professional Erik could have guessed that late career professional Erik or senior career professional Erik would have ended up as the deputy manager at Oak Ridge, I think he would have been wrong. And I think I'm really happy that he would have been wrong, because it's been an amazing journey and a kind of a crazy experience, a very non-linear career progression that has just been fantastic, because I've worked with some of the most amazing folks and done some of the most amazing things along the way. Like Colin, I am not a technical person. I actually started my federal career at the Yucca Mountain Project, like Candace, as a public affairs specialist, so basically a communications person. And from there, I actually moved up to the Hanford site in Washington State, and again, I was in public affairs, and while I was there, and as Allison and Kristen pointed out, I had the opportunity to step into this chief of staff role at Hanford, which was the first chief of staff role. So it was a lot of fun. I basically got to create the position up there and really shape it, and at the same time learn what a chief of staff does. While I was at Hanford, I had the opportunity to actually go back to Washington, D.C., not once, but twice, and work for assistant secretaries as the chief of staff. And it was a really nice experience, because I think when you get those calls, it means your career has progressed enough to the point that people are talking about key positions and opportunities, and your name is starting to come up in those discussions, and people are reaching out and they're asking you if you're interested. And that doesn't mean you have to say yes. You can say no. You can say whatever is best for your personal and your professional circumstances at the time. But for me, when I started with the Department of Energy, and I had moved from one program into the EM program, of course, that managed Hanford, it was always in public affairs, and then most recently as the chief of staff. And I thought, well, as basically a liberal arts person, I thought, my career is going to be very narrowly scoped in terms of what I'm able to do. I thought I will either be a public affairs person, or I will probably stay in this chief of staff realm, which was fine. Those were amazing jobs. I could have stayed in that place. It was really exciting work. I was learning a lot, meeting a lot of amazing people, but I wanted to experience some more things. So when I got those calls to go to Washington, D.C., I said yes, and that was very difficult because I had young kids at home at the time. My family was still very young. You know, busy life, just like all the rest of it you have. A lot going on at work, a lot going on in my home. And it was very impactful to be away from home for 4 months or 6 months at a time. And the best advice I got at the time, we've talked a lot about mentors and coaches, but the best advice I got at the time was from my wife, who said, go. She said, go. I know you want to grow. I know you want to do different things in your life. It's going to be ultimately best for our family and for you. And so I went, and it was actually kind of nice because my family actually got to come back to Washington, D.C. while I was there. So I got the benefit of showing my young kids Washington, D.C. several times. So it worked out very well. And as the chief of staff at Hanford, what I thought I understood about the chief of staff role and what I thought it would be in Washington, D.C., I was wrong again, so you're probably kind of detecting a trend here about me being wrong. But it was not at all what I expected, and how headquarters operated and what the people actually did and how decisions were made and how information actually moved through the building was not at all what I had experienced in the field. It was entirely different. But it gave me such an incredible appreciation of what headquarters does, what a program office does in Washington, D.C., and how it relates to the rest of the program. And although I could have stayed in Washington, D.C., at that time for me, moving permanently to Washington, D.C., was not the best for my family life, nor I thought my professional life, because there are some things that I still wanted to accomplish at Hanford. So I went back to Hanford after those details. But what I found is that opened a lot more doors for me, because then I was starting to talk to people about opportunities in program management, in procurement, in finance, and a lot of other fields that I never thought I would actually get into, dabble in, or even much less manage. So it really opened, if you will, that aperture of the things that were available to me. And while I was at Hanford, I tried to do as many details as possible without being too impactful on my family life, but I went to as many sites as possible because I wanted to understand how Idaho and Rocky Flats and Savannah River worked, and they're all very different than other sites. They were very different from Hanford. They have their own culture, their own operational pace, their own way of doing things, and so there was a lot to soak up and learn at those places. And I think some of the most amazing people I've ever worked with are in the EM program, and it's nice. I would really encourage you all to go places if you can and have experiences with people, not just meet people and understand what it is they do and have them give you their job description, but actually work with them, because there's nothing like having an actual shared experience with somebody, actually completing something and finishing something. And so it really gives you a lot of incredible experience and opens your doors to even more opportunities, if you will. About, I would say, around the time, maybe as COVID was starting to end, a time that I know a lot of people don't like to remember, I'd actually made the decision to move to Washington, D.C. permanently. I mean, it felt like the right time, strangely enough, in the midst of COVID, but, and I thought, what an interesting time to go back to Washington, D.C., because we were starting to come out of the pandemic. Organizations were starting to remobilize. I think that was the word. People were starting to come back into the office. And so for me, professionally, my kids were grown. They were starting families of their own. They were in other parts of the United States. It felt like the right time to move to Washington, D.C. And honestly, it felt like maybe I was going to stay in Washington, D.C., and that was where I was going to end my federal career and probably ultimately retire. I didn't know exactly what I'd be doing there. I just knew there would be more opportunities to do things when I got there. And so that actually led to the opportunity that I'm currently in, which is deputy manager at the Oak Ridge site. And again, starting with what I started talking about, I wouldn't have guessed that I would have ended up at Oak Ridge, but it's just another amazing door that opened along the way. And so I'd encourage you to think about those opportunities when they come to you. I know there's a lot of factors that you have to weigh in terms of being mobile and moving around, but it gives you a level and depth of experience that you probably will not get from just meeting people and networking, and those are all fantastic things, but if you can, go there and experience it yourself.
Thanks, Erik. And then our last speaker is going to be James Blankenhorn, and he's going to speak to us about both serving, doing part-time military duty, or maybe, I'm sure you had some stints where it was full-time military duty, and how you've incorporated that into your career path. And then after he gives his remarks, I'd like to open it up for some questions from you all if you have some. I have some to keep us busy until then, but really want you to get your thinking caps on to get ready to ask some questions of our panelists.
Great, thanks, Kristen. Well, good afternoon. It's certainly an honor and a great pleasure to join you and to be a part of this panel. I don't know how I could possibly follow the outstanding experiences that my fellow panelists have had, but I've had the privilege of having two very different careers simultaneously. First, an executive career as a senior vice president for Amentum, leading our environment and security business line, a very large P&L in our industry. And second, serving as a general officer in the United States Army. I recently closed that chapter, or closed a chapter on that career after commanding the 76th Division and Task Force 76. Those two units had 6,500 and 10,000 soldiers, civilians, and officers, respectively, and about a $12 billion annual budget. I had units in all 50 states and several countries overseas, and I'll share with you where some of those countries were. They weren't all combat zones. They won't show up on your bingo card, but I'll share those with you. So I started my military career right out of college. I joined the 82nd Airborne Division as a second lieutenant, and I was assigned to an armored platoon. Now, some folks will question, the sanity of jumping out of perfectly good aircraft while in flight, but I can tell you that it was the start of an awesome career. While the jobs, the missions, and the responsibilities were significantly different, there were several takeaways from each that benefited the other. So let me start with what it meant. To me, as a senior executive in the military, I was both humbled and privileged to have the opportunity to serve, and grateful and proud of the experience. The esprit de corps, the camaraderie, the bonds are simply unmatched. Some of the perspectives from my military experience that have helped me in my executive role included critical thinking and decision-making, lessons in leadership, planning and operating at the tactical, operational, and strategic levels, leading decentralized operations. It was not unusual for me to have units in 7 to 10 time zones on any given day. And just the broadening experience. You heard a lot about that from the other panelists and from Candace earlier about the benefits of broadening experiences and taking jobs. And I served in just about every functional area within the military, from G1 to G9. For those of you that are not military, that won't mean a whole lot to you. But suffice to say, G1 is admin, G2 is intel, G3 is operations, G4 is logistics. I won't bore you with the rest of it, but you get the point. It's sort of all of the functional areas across what you would find across any corporate structure. And then obviously command. I had the opportunity, as I said, to start as a platoon leader. I then had the opportunity for 3 company commands, probably because I couldn't get it right the first time, so they kept giving me opportunities to command companies. I commanded 2 smoke companies, a decon company, and a biological detection company. I then had a battalion command. At the time, I had the largest battalion in the Army Reserve structure. I had 11 companies under my command. So about 1,200 soldiers in the battalion. I had brigade command, and then as I said, I finished out my career as a division commander and a joint task force commander. As for the key experiences and takeaways that helped me in my executive role, because remember, I was doing this at the same time. I got 5, I think, that I'll share with you today. I think it's an unwritten requirement for every general officer when they leave the military to go off and develop their top 10 leadership lessons learned. And they usually put it on a nice flashy slide, and they come to things like this and they put it up and they talk all this stuff. Well, I'm not going to bore you with that, and I'm not taking anything off my list, but I have a couple of items that I will highlight. So first is balance. As you can imagine, I was balancing a full-time military job, a full-time civilian job, and family. And I had to do them all successfully. I couldn't do any of them partially, and I couldn't do any of them below any measure of high success. And so it forced a set of executive and behaviors and habits. I led units in combat zones. I deployed units to combat zones. I commanded units that were responsible for homeland defense and contingency response. And that job obviously carried a great deal of responsibility, not just for mission completion, but the lives of all the soldiers under my command, and the protection of the units and soldiers of the forces that relied on my support. And I had equally demanding full-time civilian jobs. So when I was promoted to Brigadier General, the events at the WIP site down in New Mexico had just occurred, and I had just accepted the role of recovery manager for the waste isolation pilot plant. So time was a precious commodity, and adapting methods to manage and optimize time was absolutely essential. Things as simple as prioritizing effort, I mean, we talk about that, but when you're really forced to do it, you've got to do it well. Eliminating distractions and time drains. All of you know, we're inundated day in and day out with text and emails and phone calls. So perfecting the art of the 4 Ds, delete, defer, delegate, or deliver, right? Go through your inbox, sort them into those 4 categories, pick the 2 items that quite frankly have the most meaning and the most impact, spend all of your time on those 2 items, and delegate, defer, delete the remainder of your inbox. It's all about keeping the main thing the main thing. Second thing I'd share with you is the importance of vision and strategy. Articulating a vision to the organization, whether it's to clear out a sector of enemy combatants, whether it's to seize an objective, or whether it's to grow the business in a certain market sector. Having and articulating a vision to everyone so they can focus their efforts on achieving the vision and know how they fit in and how they contribute to the mission accomplishment is paramount to an organization and an organization's success. Setting the left and right limits and vision was especially critical and is the underlying strength of our military today. It's the reason why our military is the strongest military in the world. I often sent units led by leaders who were 23, 24, 25 years old into areas where their actions, their words, their behaviors not only had impacts at the tactical level, but were often on the world stage where political, diplomatic, and national strategic implications were relevant. They had to know what the end game was, and they had to know what their limits were, and what their boundaries were to be able to be successful. The third item I'd share with you is lessons in leadership. As we all know, there's a whole spectrum of leadership from inspirational and transformational leaders to autocratic. And you have to, all of us have a natural tendency, a natural leadership style that we tend to go to. But recognize that leadership style has to adapt to the situation. It has to be fit for purpose. And sometimes, as a reminder, you have to be a great follower. Being a great follower sometimes is just as important as being a great leader, if not more important. A more inclusive leadership style obviously is required when you're planning and managing a staff in the boardroom. A different leadership style is required when you're leading an organization through an engagement. And still a different leadership style is required when you're leading a mass tactical air operation, asking 1,000 soldiers to jump out of aircraft in flight in pitch dark conditions at about 650 feet off the deck, and then having to go seize an objective 7 to 10 kilometers away. My soldiers and units had expectations of leadership that transcends all jobs, remaining calm and focused under all conditions. It doesn't matter how bad things are going, the folks that you command and the folks that you lead expect and demand you to be in control at all times. Walk the walk and lead by example. A genuine care for all the soldiers in your command. And then here's one that I'm not sure if it's necessarily one that soldiers would state, but when you tell them, it's sort of a Captain Obvious moment for them, and that's to be humble. Expect leadership to be humble. You have to avoid having your ego so close to your position that when your position fails or gets overrun, your ego goes with it. The fourth item I'd mention to you today is critical thinking. That's a skill that it's not so much a skill, so much as it's a practice. It can be taught, it can be learned. But critical thinking drives a deeper analysis of decision-making and problem-solving. It forces an analysis of assumptions and facts. It drives consideration of second and third order effects and consequences on actions and behaviors. It brings awareness of the lenses and biases that we all bring to the table. Never forget that the enemy always gets a vote. So the best decision-making, the best planning, the best problem-solving, doesn't matter how good it is, it's rarely going to survive first contact. And so your planning and decision-making has to be relevant, it has to be agile. And finally, a recognition, as I mentioned earlier, that we're constantly overloaded with data. And it's easy to get distracted, it's easy to get pulled down the different rabbit holes. But remember, data is just data, and it's inadequate to solve problems and make decisions. Data is only useful when it's been analyzed and comes back to you in the form of information or intelligence. So don't let yourself get dragged down into the data details. The fifth item, and I'll end with this, it's the importance of establishing and living the desired culture, investing in people, empowering leaders, and providing air cover, removing the barriers. As a military leader, my job was not to sell ice cream and to make everybody happy, right? My job was, and I was held up accountable, to make the hard right decisions, not the easy popular ones. I never sent units into harm's way without ensuring that all the support assets were also in place. Logistics, transportation, flank security, close air support, rules of engagement, indirect fire. And as I mentioned at the beginning, it wasn't just combat operations that I was in charge of or that my unit was responsible for delivering. We also had performed support to the defense support to civilian agency. And we also had the responsibility for homeland defense. So I had the privilege of deploying units to a number of events that many of you in here would be familiar with. And in fact, many of them were multi-agency operations. And so, as an example, Fukushima, that was mentioned, I think, earlier by Candace. Within 72 hours of Fukushima, I had 200 soldiers on the coast of California and another 150 en route to Japan. These were all decon specialists, they were nuclear specialists, and they had a vast array of detection capabilities that they took with them. And again, that was with the Department of Energy, and that was with Department of State. BP oil spill. I had about 3,000 soldiers that I deployed in support of the BP oil spill. Now, obviously, that was a operation run by FEMA, or response run by FEMA. The military, as I said, provided defense support to civilian agencies, and so we provided over 3,000 soldiers and leaders to that. And it might not be apparent, you know, what could the military possibly bring to that game? In addition to having Army assets, I also had Air Force and Navy assets within my command structure at that point in time. So we were providing ships, we were providing cleanup capabilities. The entire airspace over the Gulf of Mexico was actually shut down to commercial air. And so my Air Force components came in and delivered and provided all of the air traffic control across the Gulf for several weeks until we opened the corridors back up again. In 2003, those of you who remember, we had a very sad day in our nation. The shuttle burned up on reentry. I happened to be down at Fort Polk, Louisiana at that point in time. I'd been mobilized and I was on orders for 9/11. The debris field stretched over 350 miles. Most of that was in the state of Louisiana, not too far from Fort Polk, Louisiana. But it was also in Texas and Mississippi. And of course, in Louisiana, it was in the middle of a swamp. So I had about 350 soldiers that I deployed. Our job was to go collect all the debris from the debris field. Took us quite a while, as you can imagine, but proud to say the team did an awesome job. I deployed BIDS capability, biological detection capability. I had at the time the only capability within the U.S. military infrastructure, but also with all of our NATO partners as well. And so countries like Israel and countries like Japan and Korea often requested us to provide biological coverage, and I would deploy platoon elements that consisted of about 35 soldiers and had 7 mobile labs, and we covered the FIFA Soccer World Cup. We covered some of the tensions between Israel and Iran back in 1998 timeframe. I deployed 250, this was an interesting one, 250 doctors that I had within my command structure to Africa for the Ebola virus. That was interesting, not just from the perspective of the humanitarian aid that we were able to provide, but you can imagine the logistics and the security and the protection of those doctors that we had to provide the package that went with them. Just a couple of things. You won't find that on your bingo card, I don't think. If you do, great. Just to sum all that up, I'd say balance, keeping the main thing, communicating the vision and strategy often, adaptable leadership to fit the situation, critical thinking, and establishing a culture of trust and confidence. So those are the things that my military career helped develop and that have served me well in my executive role. So my takeaway is not that you should all run out and enlist in the military, although if you want to, talk to me in a break and I'll be more than happy to hook you up. But you should always take advantage of broadening experience opportunities and assignments and roles outside of your comfort zone anytime they're made available to you. With that, I think I'll yield all my time back to the...
Thank you. And just encouragement to folks, if you have a burning question that you'd like to direct to one of the panelists or maybe all of the panelists, feel free to line up at one of the mic stands and I'll try and work in a question if you'd like. But I do have a couple prepared if we're waiting for people to get up some good questions for us. And the first is about, we've talked a lot today about mentoring and also networking. And I think the topic of networking got kind of swept up in the COVID phenomenon as well. And maybe networking looks a little different now than what it did maybe 10 years ago. So we've got a group of folks who decided that, networking is important to them, or, I'm not quite sure how they got into this room with us, but now that they're our captive audience, wanted to see if the folks on the panel had any thoughts that they'd like to share with the group about how to think about networking or maybe think about mentorship. I know Candace spent some time on that during her remarks as well. Just want to open it up to either side of the table. Erik.
If I could just, I'll speak to the networking part of it because I think it's really important and I think it kind of goes hand in hand with what I said about going places and obviously meeting a lot of different folks and opening yourself to experience. The nice thing about all the people that you meet is they tend to have pretty large network, well-established networks. And so I could pick on Colin as an example with his Hill experience. Colin's got an incredible amount of Hill experience. So for me, being able to work with Colin as I did really opened the door for me to have access to kind of his congressional network, the staff that he knew on the Hill, the other people involved in that part of government as well. So if you can, as you meet people, try to get into their networks as well, because all the people that you experience at conferences like this or all the places that you go to work are going to open the door to a lot larger networks for you. And every one of those people is an even broader network. So it's kind of exponential.
Thanks, Erik.
Yeah, I think actually the COVID era, I believe, highlighted just how important networking is. It was through that period of time that networking is what enabled this country to continue to function and continue to operate. Had we not had those networks developed prior to COVID, we'd have been in a world of hurt. So I think it just highlights the importance of it. And then, the questions about how you go about doing that, just as Erik described, you should take every opportunity to meet folks outside of your sphere of influence on every occasion you can. And then it just becomes maintaining that relationship. And so I think that if it wasn't on one of our list of things, it certainly should be on one of our list of things for successful leaders. All successful leaders have extensive networking connections.
Colin?
I just first want to recognize Jim's, what he walked through. Now I know why they saved him till last, and thank God I didn't have to follow him, because that was very impressive. It really, when you're talking about it from a military perspective and putting people's lives at risk, it really does help put things in perspective. So thank you for that, Jim. I really appreciate it. From a network and mentorship, well, first of all, congratulations, you're here. So that's good. There's 750 odd people going to show up to this conference this week. So I encourage you all to go and meet as many of them as humanly possible. And the world that we live in and with social media and LinkedIn, it does make some of those networks and connecting easier. So I also encourage you all to, you know all our names, we're on the agenda, everybody else's name on the agenda, go. And I'm not looking for LinkedIn, more LinkedIn followers, but connect with people on LinkedIn. I encourage you to go do that. Don't be afraid of going to speaking to people, right? And so that's what these events are all about. And you'll find the beauty of a conference like this is we're all in the same industry. For a lot of us, our scopes of work, our daily lives are a lot of the same. Maybe at different sites. Every site has their own different personality and their own challenges and opportunities. But don't be afraid of going out there and talking to people. And the same thing on the mentorship. It's not just about seeking somebody to be a mentor. Go be a mentor yourself. And that's something that I've challenged myself with in the last couple of years. And having a mentee, as a mentor, I get a lot out of that myself. And it really helps me kind of rethink what I'm doing sometimes on a daily basis based on that conversation. So it's not just a one-way street. Don't go out there looking and obsessing about, I need to go find, a captain of industry who's going to talk to me every other week and tell me what to do in my career. Actually step up yourself and go find somebody more junior than you that may be, or even a peer that you can help and have that conversation too. So I'd encourage you to go look at something like that as well.
Anything from this side of the stage? Allison?
I can just add, a number of people have said that there are jobs that they've been asked to do, and that's a result of their network. So your network is probably the most valuable asset in your career, because new opportunities are going to come as a result of that network. So just remember that when you're at these events. Sometimes you're tired at the end of the day, you don't want to go talk to 10, 15 people, but really try to push yourself to do it and make those connections. If you met someone last conference, go say hi again this conference, see how they're doing since last time. It goes a long way.
Okay, and one of the points that I heard throughout the conversation this morning too, or this afternoon, when Colin was talking about needing to have bullet points that were no longer than 2 lines, yet still captured the technical intricacies of what was discussed. And I heard that from both of our former chiefs of staff on the panel, and that's a personal point of passion of my own. I believe that any leader, anyone on their team will benefit in their next job with having a suite of kind of executive communication skills and different ways to communicate. Your senator required two lines of, for bullet points. Allison gave the example of if there's a crisis of the day and you're trying to at least understand what the actual issue is. Do you all have some advice for folks who maybe are used to one way of communicating and again, as someone in similar roles, working with a lot of technical folks who are maybe very adept at communicating technical things, but translating them to a Hill staffer who's going to give you 2 minutes of their time, and that's all you get to do your whole brief of your $1 billion project. Any advice for folks about kind of changing their communication styles as their careers progress?
Let me just share my thoughts. First of all, personally for me, I was always horrible in reading, writing, which sounds interesting given the roles I've had. As I mentioned, I was a civil engineer, so math and science, reading, writing, not so much. Early in my career, working with people that help you with technical writing certainly brought me a long way. And then other things got into the MBA program. During that program, I had a kind of a mentor who was teaching that, who was very high up in FedEx, and he helped bring me along. And then in business development, you get into writing proposals, so you have to learn who your audience is. And so kind of connecting that all, I think that's my takeaway to your answer is you've got to know who your audience is first and foremost. The same way that I may communicate to Colin or Mr. Blankenhorn or Mr. Olds might not be the same way that I would communicate a similar topic to a peer or someone in my organization maybe lower than me, right? You got to know what the takeaways they need in 30 seconds are compared to I may have 30 minutes to go talk to my team about something. So I think the couple things, it is something that you can learn. It's something that you can get better at. It's practice makes perfect. But at the end of the day, it's all about, at least in my opinion, knowing who your audience is that will get you there.
Thanks, Joe. Allison?
I mean, I feel like Colin or Erik, this is, I can say something. Yeah, I think it is definitely a skill that can be learned. I think it's, really just the basics of who, what, when, where, why, what's the so what. Another thing I think that maybe people don't always think about is what other questions is what you've written going to raise, and maybe you can preemptively address that. But it's something that's very important. I get very frustrated when I have to rewrite things that are sent to me. So if you can send me a good first draft, I'm very happy about that. So, but I think Colin and Erik really should answer too.
That's a good chief of staff maneuver there. No, I would say, I think there is a lot of training for things like this, and I would encourage you to take as much of it as possible. I mean, there is some fantastic training you can do, some of it very real world, to help you improve your communication style, both writing and speaking. But again, I'll go back to the best experience is actually the experience. So as you move up in your careers, get in as many opportunities as possible to have those experiences. Be the person that goes to the Hill and does the briefing. Brief to a senior leader. Brief to people, to the left and to the right of you, people at your level. Brief down, brief in all directions as much as you can. do technical briefings if possible, or to more technical audiences if possible, because it forces you to not only learn the information, but also how to convey it. So getting yourself in those situations where you actually have to do it is really the best way to learn. I found people in this industry, whether they're contractors, feds, people on the Hill, even our regulators, no one really wants you to fail. At the end of the day, they just want the information. So the nice part is you usually get feedback pretty quickly, almost instantaneously while you're providing that information. And you can use that, and oftentimes a lot of people will give you feedback that helps you improve your style, which is very nice. And so I would say very infrequently that is poor or bad feedback. It's usually done in a very, very constructive way. Last thing I'll add is learn all the different types of communication. 90% of what we do is nonverbal. We all know that, right? I mean, so learn that part of communication as well, not just speaking and not just writing.
For me, in my experiences, and I have a communications background, is understanding the details. If I was responsible for having to write something, whether it's for a member of Congress, an assistant secretary, a secretary, is I felt I always had to feel like I knew the details better than anybody. So that would require the work to go talk to the technical experts, the engineers, the scientists, to be able to understand it. And then if I could be able to articulate that in a written form myself, and then being able to present it to whoever needs to present it. I think it's interesting for I don't know how many non-technical people here, but we have at least 3 or 4 communications background people on this audience. And what has really been helpful for me from a career perspective is being in a communications role. I always had such a broad brush of have a broad brush of understanding of whatever industry I was in, whether it was working for a private company, whether it was working for the environmental management program at DOE, whether it was working on the Hill. You had to have a pretty good understanding of everything that was going on. And that has really enabled me in my job now from an operational perspective too, is where, again, I'm non-technical, but going through, and then again, unfortunately, it's been over 30 years I've been working now. Hard to believe, I know, but it's really helped me to get to the point where I am now in being able to delve into the details and being able to figure out how to communicate it effectively. It really does help me to this day. So it's a skill and practice.
Okay. Well, I think what we will do is practice what we preach up here and give everyone an extra 7 minutes of our networking break so that you can, kind of dig deeper on all these things you've heard so far in the afternoon. We are reconvening back here at 3:15 where Jenny Stoltz is going to moderate our last session for the afternoon. Thank you.